4, 3, 2.
Thank you very much. You're through to the Lounge Academics podcast. That's the first one. Podcast. I'm KJ, the first Lounge Academic. Don't forget, on YouTube, you need to hit the notification bell to be notified of our next episode. Please do comment, down below. We really like to hear your comments and feedback on how you're finding the session and the episodes. And of course, if you've not done so already, you need to make sure that you subscribe. Okay, right. So moving on. We have got a heavyweight in the studio. Yeah, well, she's not a heavyweight. I mean, she's quite small in size, but she's a heavyweight in terms of character. She brings a lot of energy, right, and a lot of colour. And do you know what? As part of the podcast, we've been starting a whole new series of talks as a part of our podcast mixtape. And I'm very fortunate to have Enam Gbewonyo.
Not bad.
You see that? Look at that. Do you see that? Look at I was waiting. I saw your top lip quiver a bit, but I got it right. You see that? I delivered.
Not quite the African way, but
not
it's
the
okay.
African. It's okay. I'm Caribbean. I don't
We'll
know.
let you off.
I'm trying the thing. Okay. So before we get into it, let's kind of talk about your work, Enam, right? So let's just frame and give the context, okay? So Enam is a British Ghanaian artist, right? 1980, is that when you born?
Indeed.
Oh my gosh, same year. I shouldn't have said that, really. That's a bit live, showing our age. But studied BA European Textile Design at Bradford School of Art and Design. She then embarked on a 6-year career in knitwear design in New York, but following redundancy, returned to the UK, where her life as an artist began. Passionate about elevating black women artists, she is also the curator as well as the founder of the Black British Female Artists BBFA collective, and the collective serves as a platform to support emerging black women artists to build sustainable careers whilst working to advocate for more inclusivity in the British arts landscape. Welcome,
Indeed.
Enam.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. You look very colourful. I like the kind of blue and
I thought I'd have to represent, textile artists, background in fashion, I've got to represent.
I'm liking it. It looks good. So I know as part of Lounge Academics, we always do this thing around talking about what's your topic. That's our main theme. So we always like to kind of look at a particular issue or a problem that we may be looking to address. And we often see our guests as presenting the kind of solution in a way, to that topic and issue.
Okay.
And I think most definitely this episode speaks to this issue around invisibility, particularly of women within the arts landscape. Would you agree?
Yes, exactly that.
So I guess it's about kind of addressing this, and we know about the collective that you formed in terms of addressing that issue.
Yeah.
But before we kind of get into that, let's get a bit of a background to yourself and where you're from and kind of your reference to art in particular. So, you're a textile and performance artist. I know I made a big boob. It was like performing artist, and Enam like slapped me, on my wrist, through WhatsApp. But I know obviously there is a difference. But as a textile and performing artist, what does this mean in context? What does that mean to be a textile and performance artist?
So basically, I use the medium of textiles to create artwork. So my background is in textile design. That's what I studied, as you talked about in my bio. And so I basically use those practices. So that's knitting, embroidery, weaving, printing, as well as like painting and the kind of more traditional kind of visual arts practice to create artworks, basically. And for me, I feel like it gives me much more scope in terms of building a narrative, using really different mediums. I'm really about tactility and texture.
Sure.
But also it's kind of inherent to who I am because I originate from the Ebo tribe in Ghana, and traditionally we're weavers. And I remember when I was little, my mum taking me to a weaving village, and that's kind of what spurned my real kind of interest in this medium without me even knowing it. And it's something that I realized like kind of later on in life, like having studied textiles and all of this stuff, that actually this was my path. It was always supposed to be this because that's who I am. It's part of who my DNA, basically.
Of course, totally.
So, and it's interesting because performance in a way also lends itself to my cultural heritage in that we're also storytellers in our tribe. A lot of African tribes have festival and dance and performance as a way of telling stories and kind of retelling the histories of our cultures. So again, it's something that was quite inherent to who I am. and I found that I kind of took to it really easily, because it's part of me. So yeah, that's kind of what my textile and performance art is.
Totally. So there's a lot, you know, you carry, so you literally embody, you know, in terms of art, you're embodying obviously, you know, heritage, culture,
Yes.
you know, rituals. So
Yes.
there's a lot
Yeah.
that's played out in terms of your work actually.
Yes.
And I know, obviously that's not always been the case, because I know I've known you for a long time.
Yes.
I know. And when we initially met, I know that it was through you was in the scope of working within education.
Yes,
we initially met.
indeed,
So
yeah.
obviously you've kind of returned back to kind of art, having done it as part of your degree.
No. So basically, when I moved back to the UK from the US,
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And
Sure.
actually, while I was still working in design in New York, I had started thinking about teaching and teaching art specifically. So when I moved back to the UK, I thought actually I really want to kind of give the youth that kind of passion that I have for art and for creating. And so I was working in education and thinking about kind of forging a career as a teacher. And the thing with me is that I always like to do my due diligence. So
Sure.
I decided to work in a school before like applying for the PGCE and just try and get a sense of
Check
what I'm
you
like
out.
with children, and you know, because I don't want
do
to
your groundwork, do a recce first.
Exactly. And I absolutely loved working with young people. But what I found really challenging was the politics, the paperwork, the things that actually
The
take you
bureaucracy.
away
Oh,
exactly
gosh.
from working with young people and actually helping them kind of understand life and start to learn about themselves, and develop their interests and passions. And then also at that time, the funding for creative curriculums started to be scrapped with the coalition government. So it was just like an uphill battle. And I realized that actually I'm going to have to figure out a different way to be able to work with young people. But I just missed making with my own hands. And I really wanted to kind of really try and forge a career for myself
Sure.
as an artist
Of
as
course.
well.
And I know to some extent, I'm sure we're going to talk about it in a bit more detail, but
Yeah.
I know you're kind of coming back to that in terms of giving back, in the
Yeah.
sense of coming back to those roots in helping young people and thinking about the future generation of artists,
Yeah.
particularly the next generation as well. So I know that's there. I just went to show everyone, check out, look at this. I was saying to Yaz, I said, you know, Enam, this is a portfolio, right? And a slide deck of a portfolio and biography. I just think it's excellent. I just this picture, it's cool, so cool. I just love it. You need to check out. I know I'm jumping ahead, guys. Right? I know they're gonna give me stick for this, but we do this at the end. But you need to follow her on Instagram. It's so sick. Yeah, images, and all your work is just brilliant.
Oh,
So you
thank
know,
you.
I'm a total Enam fan. Totally. So we know, obviously, kind of moving on to kind of look at the Black British Female Artists Collective.
Yeah.
So obviously there's an issue there. Why have you needed or felt the need to create this collective? What are we kind of addressing here? What are the issues?
So I started kind of trying to exhibit and start a life in the arts around 2010. So I moved back to the UK in 2008.
Yep.
And obviously the arts industry was completely new to me, and I didn't really know how to start, where to go, who to get advice from. And so I was kind of learning as I went along. But what I found is that I couldn't really find the right platforms for my work, and the audiences in some of the kind of art fairs and exhibitions that I was doing just didn't connect with my work, or at least they didn't once they saw me. And then talking to other artists and finding that they felt the same, they were facing the same challenges and struggles. And I've always been someone that's quite proactive, and I was like, you know, I want to do something about this, and why not bring other artists together? And I just thought as a collective, we have a much stronger voice, and
Of course.
possibly would be able to kind of navigate these challenges and break down, you know, barriers and kind of break the glass ceiling by coming together.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
How have you found that within the UK context? Because I was talking to Yaz a couple of days ago about this, actually, that I find that it's a real struggle to... The culture of collaboration, this has just been my experience, has often been kind of non-existent.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a UK British thing, I don't know, but I know, say, for example, in the States, I think what we're doing, as even with the platform we're doing now and what you're doing, I think there would be a totally different kind of response in terms of of collaboration. I know
Okay.
it may not be comparable in that regard, but I
Yeah.
just think here, I guess I've noticed there's a bit of a struggle, or there is tensions in collaboration.
I don't know. I think that's changing. I
Okay.
think that's definitely changing because, especially within the art sphere, I see a lot
Okay.
of artists coming together and working collectively to, especially within the black art space and just artists of color in general. So one thing I was going to say is that basically whenever I talk about the collective or when I do kind of a presentation about the collective, I always start with the landscape of the kind of mainstream or Western arts industry,
Sure.
which is that it's very elitist, sexist, racist and ageist. And for a lot of black artists, it's changing now because kind of the millennial generation are going straight into an arts career from kind of school, from graduation. But for the people
Wow,
of
literally,
my...
that's a big shift.
Yeah, that's a big shift
Huge
because
shift.
for artists such as myself, kind of the 80s generation, a lot of them either had to come to it later on in life because of pressures from family to do things that are much
Yeah.
more tangible. I mean, even for myself,
Don't
I
pay
had
the
that
bills.
conversation
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
parents
yeah,
because
yeah,
for them
yeah.
it's like, you're going to be an artist. How are you going to make any money? Because
Yeah.
and that's a part of the reason I set up the collective was that mindset, because there's no reference point. They don't see any black artists that are successful, certainly not women either. So the artists
you've
that
been
they know of
forward-thinking in
are
that
these
regard,
old
yeah.
white men, and that's what's still taught in the curriculum to this day, which again is an issue, because if you're not seeing yourself represented, you don't see a space for yourself in the arts industry.
Yeah.
But art is intrinsic to who we are.
Of
It's
course.
part of our culture.
Of course.
Everything that we do is artistic. So
Yeah.
to say that there's no space for us is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I've kind of lost my train of
That's
thought now. But so I kind of start off the presentation with that just to give a flavour of why it was so important for me as a person to do something about it, because I found in researching how to kind of put this collective together that in the 80s, an artist called Lubaina Himid put
Okay.
together a group of women of colour artists, and they did a number of exhibitions. So the Black Arts Group was quite prolific in the 80s, and Lubaina met artists such as Claudette Johnson and Sonia Boyce,
Sure.
and they felt that they need to group together and form their own collective as women, because they had very different issues that they wanted to kind of discuss and tackle within the arts realm. And so this had already existed. But I'm now
Okay.
in my 30s learning about these artists. Why was I not taught about
That
these
before,
artists
yeah.
throughout my arts education? That's hugely problematic. And that's still a problem now. There are still so many artists that don't know about these seminal artists that really paved the way for
course.
us. And they're starting to change. They're starting to get the recognition they should have had years ago. Lubaina Himid won the Turner Prize, was that last year?
After how many years?
Exactly. She's
Yeah.
in her 60s now, and it's like,
Jeez.
why is it that they're only getting that recognition now, so late on in life? Frank Bowling only just got a retrospective at Tate. So Tate has run a number of exhibitions for African American artists. This is the first Black British artist that they've given any kind of real platform to. And everyone talks about Soul of a Nation, which was a fantastic show. But again, it was very representative of African American artists. So why is there not a retrospective for Black British artists when we've got fantastic art happening that's been happening here since the 80s and well before that? And so these are the kind of precursors to this age now, where a lot of artists are coming together because they don't want to follow those cycles. And the only way we can really affect change is by really becoming a huge voice that, the Western or the mainstream art world can't ignore.
Sure. And in terms of, because you said you noticed the shift, you said there's definitely been a shift. What do you
Yeah.
think is, I know you said things are slightly different now. Is that because these collectives are being formed, because you're saying, because I just remembered being, because we're talking my arts kind of career or studies stopped at A level.
Okay.
So I did art at A level.
Yeah.
And for the very same reason as you said with your parents, my parents
Yeah.
like, what, where are you going to,
Yeah.
what's that going to pay? How are you
Yeah.
making money from this?
Yeah.
What an artist who makes money
Yeah.
as an artist, they're always broke, they're
Yeah.
always poor.
Yeah.
That was always the feeling that I got. Whereas now you're saying that there's a noted shift in that artists are actually leaving, graduating and going
Yeah.
straight into paid
Yeah.
into work, and are able to actually earn from
Well,
from their art
I
and
wouldn't say that they're able to work.
Whoa, okay. Yeah.
What I'm saying is that you finish art school, and for this younger generation, they are just paving forward and trying to kind of build a career within the arts.
Okay.
Many of us still, have day jobs to fund your career,
Sure.
because until you get to a point where, you're consistently getting commissions and consistently selling, you have to have other alternative forms
Yeah.
of income.
To sustain you in the meantime.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
And I think as Black artists, there's always challenges to, kind of bridging that gap, or that shift change in your career, where you get to a point where you can be a full-time artist. But what I'm saying is that they actually have the freedom to be able to do that. Whereas when I finished college, because I studied textile design as well, for me it was a case of I'm going to have to find a design job, because if I turned to my mother and said that actually
Sure.
I'm just going to kind of make art, I think I probably would have been thrown out of the house or something. So
I hear you. More than likely, yeah.
So
Yeah.
and to be fair, that's not there were some artists who, even the time of 2001 when I was graduating, tried to forge careers, but I think it was a lot difficult. Things are kind of starting to shift now, because it's very much part of the conversation. And even though I hate this word diversity, because I still feel like it others us as people of colour, the whole diversity issue has made it a thing that, institutions can't ignore. It's on, it's a buzzword across the arts industry, as it is in most industries at the moment. And while there's, issues with tokenism and whether, these are actual really genuine interests to actually affect change within the institutions, it just means that at the moment there's a lot of opportunity. Whether that will last remains to be seen.
So you seem to be a bit cynical about that, just slightly. I know that may not be the label that you would attach to it, but I think there's a reason to be a bit cautious and tentative towards this. Whose agenda is this? What does it mean in terms of diversity? How has the diversity agenda played out in terms of your career and your work? Would you say it's been advantageous to you, or how have you been
I
positioned?
think it's certainly been advantageous in terms of the collective.
Okay.
It's given us much more space, and people actually seek us out to be involved in projects. And I think for us, it's really easy to kind of see when we're approached whether this is real genuine interest, or whether this is someone that's just trying to tick a box. But I think overall, what I will say since founding the collective is that it's been really well received across the board. And I think that it's just, like I said, it just shows that we're at a stage now where things are starting to change. And of course, we're not going to see the real change that we want, in the next few years. This is, it's about legacy. It's about starting to build those foundations with the hope that, in, 20, 30, 50 years to come, the artists coming up behind us won't have to struggle as much as we did. And it will just continue to kind of, get to a point where there is real equity across the board.
Of course. And at the moment, what are the activities of the collective? I know we broadly have kind of heard about the aims, breaking through that glass ceiling, inclusivity, looking at boosting visibility. But in terms of these tangible kind of practical activities, what does the collective, how do you do that?
First and foremost, it's about kind of supporting the collective members. So at the moment there's 4 of us, and it's about kind of supporting each other to really build our careers sustainably, so we have that longevity. And then more broadly, it's about the support that we can give to others. So ideally, we'd really love to set up an incubator program to help other emerging Black female artists just learn about the world of art, the business of art, because I think that's something that you don't really learn at art school, and it's really important to know to be able to navigate the art world. And kind of things such as, branding yourself, all these things like social media that have become part and parcel of, your career. And it's also about working with institutions, like I said before. So that's both across the education and kind of the exhibition space to bring more representation, whether that's us coming in and doing workshops, but also, you know, hopefully in the longer term, being able to work hand in hand with educational bodies and with the government to really make changes within the national curriculum.
That's right,
for young people to kind of, you know, see a more, you know, representational scope of the artists that are working and are successful. And then also working with Black women artists across different regions of the world, because I think Black women artists work at a deficit wherever you are in the world. And so by coming together globally, then we hope to affect change on a global scale. And that means that we all win. So that's a case of us doing cross-cultural exchanges. We did our first one in 2017 in Ghana. And that was a case of us working with 3 female artists from Ghana. We had kind of a roundtable conversation, learning about the challenges they face, kind of an exchange. And then we actually worked together to develop a collaborative artwork. And that was part of this street art festival. And then did like a talk as well, open to the public, about women's kind of art.
Was that in terms of the festivals and stuff? How I take it, photographs, image?
Photography and video. And I think it was really beneficial on both sides for us, learning more about the art scene in Ghana. 2 of us are Ghanaian, so we already had an idea, but just kind of building those networks. And then also working collaboratively in that way was just in terms of our own arts practice was really developmental. But then it was also really more importantly, it was the relationships that we built with these 3 female artists who we've continued to kind of grow our friendship with and support. And it's just really beautiful to see, and we hope to be able to build on that more, and do some further kind of cross-cultural exchanges and hopefully kind of bring artists from all these different regions that we connect with to the UK.
And I guess there's an element to, and for me, I'm thinking about, you know, what you said a bit earlier around education and affecting change in the curriculum and stuff. I think there is a huge, I mean, we've been having this conversation, us as a people, it's been in the public consciousness for some time in terms of decolonizing the curriculum and looking at making changes and what that looks, what does a decolonized curriculum look like? But I think definitely these exchanges, I feel there's a real added benefit from those exchanges and how they could be used to maybe inform research as even as anecdotal action research pieces to kind of share the experiences which could be documented, which could be written about, and shared, you know, widely for people to be able to access. And I think that would definitely dovetail with the attempt to kind of affect change in education. And I think these beautiful projects that are happening where these exchanges, they need to be more widely accessible, you know, and documented. You know, I know we had in the previous episode we had Talika Kirkland from Kayad, obviously, which is the first, you know, institute looking at, you know, costume and African adornment and dress, and documenting that and archiving that stuff and generating research. And I think in much the same way, I guess in other art spaces, it's definitely needed.
Definitely, and that's something that, you know, we kind of voice a lot in terms of the fact that we need much more documentation of art by Black artists, and that needs to come from us. We need to own that narrative, because for so long others have written that narrative, and it's something we talk about in the kind of exhibition space as well. When you go to galleries and the language that's used to talk about work by Black artists and ethnographical works as well, how they're represented. I think that goes hand in hand with education, because you have young people that go on these school trips, and if they go on these trips and all they see is, you know, they'll go to the National Portrait Gallery and the only images of Black people they see are the servants that are in the background and painted basically to kind of showcase the kind of
power and colonial
exactly that, the colonial power. But a lot of the time, especially when looking at female bodies, because again for me it's all about women, it's that case of this is the white feminine ideal and this is direct opposite. And as a little Black girl looking at those kinds of images, which is then again kind of regurgitated in the media and everything around you, ways, how do you get that sense of worth and that sense of value? And that's something that's really important to me, and that I kind of research and explore within my own arts practice, this idea of value and sense of self, which is important in the art scope in terms of
Totally.
how our work is valued, but also how we value our art, which a
Of
lot
course.
of that has been dictated by the words that are attached to art, like primitive and tribal, and it's something that then becomes this idea of what the aesthetic of art by black artists should look like. And all of these things are really debilitating, but it's really interesting when you start delving into it, how all of these things interconnect and bring us to this present point here. And you start to understand where, you know, this mindset comes from, and this really kind of devalued sense of being, which then impacts, you know, our communities and how we relate to each other, both in terms of love, in terms of commerce, how we do business with each other, even in the youth.
It's
you know,
ripples,
the ripple effect is,
course.
it's this idea of this generational trauma that keeps repeating itself. And that's something that only we can really kind of really be able to overcome. And that, I feel, is by looking back and learning from the past to be able to kind of forge forward.
And I love the fact, a bit like ourselves, I love the fact that, you know, you're go-getters. You're not going to wait for the solution to drop in your lap. You're going to go out and forge your way forward. And I really admire that, and I love that about the collective and your activities and your endeavours. I guess I always bring this up, and I know sometimes it's a bit of a downer for some of our guests, but obviously this costs money to do this. And I'm assuming, could correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of a self-funded enterprise, I guess, in that regard, in terms of funding your activities. Obviously looking at the exchange that you did in Ghana, I know you've been to Nigeria recently as part of talks as well, you know. So how do we, for these great initiatives, these wonderful, beautiful initiatives that are out there, how do we make these sustainable? How do we fund these? How do we invest in?
So actually, our project in Ghana, we actually applied for funding from the Arts Council and were successful.
Well, it still exists, the Arts Council,
yes. It still exists. It still exists.
Dwindling funds. You're lucky to get something.
There's actually a lot of kind of funding bodies out there. And the Arts Council, for a number of years now, has kind of had this program, the Creative Case for Diversity, which is kind of leading the thinking behind the funding projects. But for us, I think, as a collective and learning from the past as well, we don't want to be reliant on these funding bodies because, again, this idea of tokenism and the fact that, you know, diversity is a trend, but at some point that is
no
going
longer.
Exactly.
Flavour of the month goes, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And it's a new flavour or topic.
And it's really about us being self-sufficient. And so a lot of it is actually kind of replicating the business models of, you know, institutions such as Tate that run on patronage. So looking at ways that we can develop that, but really just thinking creatively and outside the box in terms of how we build our revenue. And it's also about really building relationships within the black community, especially the high net worth community. Because I look at African American artists and the fact that a lot of their sales come from the high net worth community and the African American community. So why can't we replicate that? We have a huge community of high net worth individuals, and I think the disconnect is the fact that they just don't see art as a commodity that would really bring any value. But when you then look at the secondary market and see how art by black artists, although yes, it's mostly African American artists and African artists, but there is a real growth in that market. And so by bringing those two together, I feel like that could really then bring a real shift change in terms of the value of black British art.
And I mean, I'm not very knowledgeable. I mean, the art space and commodities and looking at art and getting gigs, and that's fairly new to me. I must admit, I'm a novice in that area. But I was having this conversation with another previous guest before, and Yaz was here with me as well, kind of talking about this. But I guess as people of colour, as black people as well from the African diaspora, I don't know, I may be challenged on this, but I find that we're not necessarily wired to look at art in that way as something of value, generally speaking, regardless of, you know, it being produced by African artists or whatever. But regardless, it's often seen to not really have any value. Whereas if we was having this conversation with maybe, let's say, our white counterparts, and maybe a totally different conversation, is it safe to kind of make that kind of judgment? Yeah,
I mean,
culturally
in general, and again, that goes back to these arts institutions as very kind of elitist and exclusive and not for us. but also the fact that for centuries our art has been devalued in the mainstream art world. It has, you know, these tags of tribal and primitive that make it seem like it's not worthwhile. And yet, like I was saying before, like especially African art antiquities is probably one of the like most kind of lucrative art forms, and sells for ridiculous amounts of money in the secondary market, in auction houses. And again, none of that money is going back into the black community. So I think it's part of, you know, our work is also about, you know, changing that mindset,
raising
awareness, exactly.
Totally. And as far, how long has the collective been running now?
Since 2015. So
Okay,
it'll be 4 years, the end
4
of this
years.
year.
Wow. And I guess, as you've said, and there's 4 of you as part of the collective now.
Yeah.
Are there plans to kind of grow that membership?
Yes.
And how, and what's the plans for the future in terms?
Yeah, so definitely the idea is to be able to open up to more members, but again, it goes hand in hand with what you were saying about, you know, having the money to support that.
Sure.
We'd like to get to a point where we have a team that can help in terms of the actual business administration, project management side of things. And in that way, then we have more space to be able to support many more members.
Sure.
And like I said, again, in terms of being able to then be able to roll out an incubator program, because again, we'd ideally want to offer this for free, because again, a lot of the issues for black artists is you're coming from low income families where it's really difficult to support yourself.
Sure.
And then that also becomes an issue
don't have
for
that luxury.
Exactly. So, and I mean, it's the same for those that study and want to work in art as a profession, in terms of like on the curation side or in the institutions, and the fact that a lot of these kind of entry level jobs aren't that very well paid, if they're paid at all. So, you know, for a lot of black academics, they can't afford to work for free.
Of course.
And that's where you then get this case of there being not that many black curators in the institutions, and there really needs to, it's a real catch-22. So it really needs to, in order for there to be equity across the board in the arts industry, there really needs to be a real change and a look at how they can provide access for those that aren't coming from backgrounds where they can have the, you know, bank of mum and dad like help support them while they're in these entry level roles till they get the experience to move up in the industry.
And that's the thing, and it's becoming increasingly harder, I guess, with tuition fees going up, you know, the cost of living going up, you know, family, you know, we're finding that it's interesting because obviously my kind of area is in higher education, and we're seeing increasingly, as you said, students are often having to juggle, you know, other commitments. Some of them are already parents. Some of them obviously need to work as part of that process as well. And it can be very difficult and very challenging. And obviously, if you've got at the end of it that, you know, I'm not guaranteed to get work, then, you know, the balance is probability and stuff. You know, it makes it far more challenging. So, I mean, just something to raise here. We had a previous guest on, Chantal Rochester. Okay. So Chantal Rochester is a line producer. Film. Her bag is film. Yeah. So she'd produced the film that's gone up on a feature film that was on Netflix. Okay. And her whole thing is talking about, you know, finance and how to kind of finance your film, where to get investment from and stuff as well. And what I found quite interesting, which was a bit sad, was that she said actually a lot of her the lot of the investment that she sourced has actually come from outside of the UK.
Interesting.
Canada was one area, was one place that she kind of referred to in terms of getting funding for a UK based project or film. So I don't know, I just to put it out there as a talking point or something to consider, because I'm really passionate around these movements and the great work that's being done, but I do also acknowledge that, you know, we're not a charity. This isn't a community project. So you're not giving back, you know, in that regard. You know, it needs to be sustainable. But I think there's definitely something to be said around looking beyond the UK where possible, to kind of secure investment. And I think seed funding, there's certain things that are available that I've heard, and this is what she was talking about. But I don't know if that's relevant in art spaces.
I think it can present a challenge within the arts because for most regions, the funding that they provide is for that region. So, for instance, there are a lot of funding streams in the US that you have to be a US resident. There are wider ones like the Ford Foundation and those kinds of spaces where it's open to anyone. But typically it can be quite difficult to access funding overseas unless it in some way relates to, the area or the region that you're applying to. If you're going to then be doing work in that space, then you can apply for funding. But I think corporate sponsorship is another route. And that's something that we definitely look to. So, for instance, we just did an exhibition that was actually in collaboration with this amazing Nigerian art space called SMO Contemporary. And that was...
Is that the High Commission? No, is that something separate? Sorry.
No, so this was here in London. It was in partnership with the law firm Hogan Lovells with their Africa department. So partnerships like that can be really, really kind of helpful in terms of, they helped us build a platform, they have an amazing kind of client base, but it was also just, a kind of new audience that we were bringing our work to.
And
so
business and opportunities.
Exactly.
That's good. So kind of corporate, those partnerships.
Those kind of corporate partnerships and sponsorships. They can also be a solution, and it's just really building your network. It's so important. Networking is so important in the art world, just anyway as an artist, and it's something that it takes time. A lot of the kind of projects and things that have we've done recently have been built on relationships that were started years ago, even before the collective formed. So I can't stress how important that is.
Totally. And if you was to give advice to an artist, say we've got a young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, aspiring artist, right? Coming out fresh, graduating, to go on to take on the world of art. What advice would you be giving them right now? What tips would you give them?
I would say don't be scared to just go out there and put something together yourself. I really, really, truly am thankful for the collective. Just in terms of peer support, working with 3 other artists who understand the challenges, we really lean on each other. And also it's just the fact that by coming together, we've completely broadened our network because we each have our own kind of groups of networks, and then coming together.
Because you all do different types of art as well, which helps.
And we meet very different people. So that has just been such a godsend, and I think it's a really, really difficult journey. And so having people that have your back, and just to be able to have those conversations with that completely understand and can kind of help kind of keep you motivated and empowered, I think is really, really important. So many times when I've just been like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. And exactly. And it's the collective sisters like, come on, So, and it's, they always remind me that this is legacy. It's not just about us, So I think it's really important to have those like-minded people that you can kind of, fall back on, but also you all support each other. And also community is really important because even in terms of my artist studio, I think it's such a great space because there's so many different creators, but we all kind of come together and
is this
share.
Kind of like a collaborative co-creating space?
So there's a lot of kind of artist studio spaces across London, and this particular one, I don't know if it's just the right people, I don't know, but there's just a real kind of community, kind of collegiate attitude, which I really, really appreciate. So I mean, for a young person, it's perseverance. It's feel the fear and do it anyway. I think that's something that I've learned definitely, especially as I've gotten older. I think I was kind of I grew up in a situation where you're kind of taught fear, and so it's kind of trying to overcome that now. And yeah, it's like when opportunities come, just say yes. My brother put me onto this. So Shonda Rhimes, she said she had a year of just saying yes. So you know what, you just say yes, unless it's something where you have that energy where this isn't right. Just say yes to every opportunity, and guaranteed you will learn something from it, be it positive or negative. It's something that you learn and you keep growing through every opportunity, and network, like I said before.
Definitely.
Is so important. Yeah,
so important.
Yeah.
So Enam, as always, time is against us.
Yeah.
Time is against us. So we often ask our guests, if there were two people that could be sitting, that you could recommend or endorse, that you would say, what would bring an interesting perspective or bring an interesting topic into the lounge, who would they be and why?
Okay, so they would be my dear friend / cousin.
Okay.
And I say that jokingly. So she's basically someone that I grew up with. And in African families, like, your elder is your auntie. So like, she's like my cousin. But whenever we go out, she's like, oh, meet my friend. I'm like, oh, I'm a friend. Okay. She'll kill me for saying that. But so it's Krista Amwa. And she is the founder of Amwa Designs, a textile design company that is absolutely fantastic. But on top of that, she founded Africa by Design, which is about providing a platform for amazing design from African designers, so from the continent. And since she started Africa by Design, or ABD, they had their kind of inaugural event in Ghana. She's from Ghana as well. She's since shown at Dubai Design Week, London Design Festival in Egypt. She's just really blazing a trail. And what I love is that it's about providing space for designers who wouldn't necessarily get that opportunity, because again, African design gets overlooked, and again gets this idea, this kind of labeling of this aesthetic that is kind of tribal and primitive. And there's so many amazing designers making work that's also very sustainable. And she just really wanted to create a space for those designers to be seen on an international platform. And I think that's just so fantastic. I'm so inspired by her, because running your own design business is, a headache in itself, let alone then creating this entity as well that's doing good for so many others. And her brand is just beautiful. Brilliant. And I'm saving my pennies so that I can get my house decked out in ABD and Amwa Design. Brilliant. And then the other person, again keeping it in the family, is my brother Beko KG, who is a holistic fitness instructor. He has been teaching for years, I think pretty much since I can ever remember, and his ethos is about mind, body and spirit. So it's about the meditation, it's about eating healthy, it's about it's a way of life, basically. He is the director of Budokan Yoga in the UK. Budokan Yoga was set up by Cameron Shane, and it's a martial arts form that ties in yoga, meditation, mindfulness with grappling, with mixed martial arts, with capoeira, with taekwondo. So it's a whole like fitness system.
Mash up the studio.
Exactly, basically. But he teaches so many other forms of fitness, and he's just well, no, but that's the funny thing, is that he's just such a peaceful guy, because he comes from that place.
Of course,
so,
So,
but you wouldn't want to cross it.
Of course not.
But he's been teaching for years. He teaches internationally, all over the world. Been sponsored by. No, I have to get this right now. So I'm not going to say it because I can't remember which brand. But he's absolutely amazing. I train with him, and he keeps me grounded.
Brilliant. Well, Enam, thank you.
No worries.
It's been
thank
emotional.
You so much.
It's been fun. No, thank you.
It has been fun.
It just goes really. It
does. It really does.
But thank you so much.
No, thank you.
As always, YouTube, comments down below. Make sure you hit the notification bell to be informed of future episodes. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? You need to subscribe. Okay, we had Enam in the studio. Thank you. This has been Lounge Academics. KJ.